Om Shanti. Welcome to Midday Meditation. I've been gone for a while. I think last week Yusuf did Midday Meditation. He had some trouble joining. So there was, I think, a couple of days where he just couldn't get on. He wasn't allowed access to Zoom. So sorry about that. And then the weekend before, Michelle led Midday Meditation. And I'm going to kind of pick up where I left off before I went to New York, except pick up with some of the concepts that were discussed when I was in New York. And during the month of May, I talked about the mind, and I talked about the intellect, and I talked about the stories we create and store, all of our stored information as abilities. These are three abilities of the soul. The mind is like a screen, and on the screen, we can project all kinds of things: thoughts, feelings, memories, impressions, perceptions. All of these things get put on the screen of the mind. And then the intellect is the part of consciousness that can understand, that can say, is this good information on the screen of my mind? Is this true? Is this worth considering? Or is it possibly garbage? So that's the intellect. And then I talked about the storage area of consciousness, that everything we do, think, feel goes into the storage area. And then it's going to end up coming out on the screen of my mind. Whatever makes a big impression is going to come out again. So those are the main abilities of consciousness, those three. There's another big player in consciousness who we have to look at, and this is the ego. And we have to understand how the ego uses consciousness. And so we learn and we practice the awareness that I'm a soul, I'm a being of light, I'm a spiritual being, I'm eternal, I live in this body, the body isn't me, the soul is me. And we practice this when we meditate together so that we can have a better understanding of the self. However, in general, the ego doesn't know anything about the soul, absolutely nothing. And when we don't know who we are, we kind of create a possible self. And that's the ego, this possible me that I'm creating because I don't know who I am. And of course, we want to be a good self. I want to be a good person. So the ego focuses on my good qualities. Now, we also have weaknesses, and that's very uncomfortable for the ego, very uncomfortable, because we are actually fundamentally, we souls are fundamentally good beings. And so when weaknesses and mistakes and faults and bad habits and vices and all of these kind of come up in consciousness, it's very difficult for the ego. How can these exist if I'm a good being? So the ego uses the mind to deal with this. And one way that the ego deals with it is by saying, actually, I'm good, but the problem was the situation. The problem is the other person, or the problem is the weather, whatever. The ego will find something or someone outside of myself, blame, if you will. That's one way ego deals with this uncomfortable information that I've made mistakes, I haven't lived up to my abilities. A second way that the ego can do this is the ego can say, well, yeah, I made this mistake, but you made a much bigger mistake. And so my mistake was nothing compared to your mistake. And so the ego will focus all of the attention on the mistake that somebody else made. And this makes the ego feel better. And another way that the ego could possibly deal with it is just to feel bad. I made this mistake. I'm not really good. I made this mistake many times and just feel bad and put the self down. And another way that the ego can deal with this is to get really angry at whatever it was that triggered my mistake. So the ego is trying, but what happens is the ego is always dealing with mistakes and problems and weaknesses. That's the life of the ego. Trying to be good, trying to prove that I'm good, trying to get other people to see that I'm good, trying to get them to like me. So the ego gets almost addicted to using the mind to try to deal with all of this, the problems and the weaknesses and all of this. The ego is obsessively using the mind. And so even if nothing is happening, the ego can be putting negative thoughts into the mind. And so we, as souls, as beings of higher consciousness, as divine beings, we have to recognize that the ego is doing this. The ego is trying its best, but the ego isn't the real me. The ego thinks my value lies in my physical appearance, my ability to keep friends, how much money I make, how much influence I have. The ego thinks all of these kind of things are my value. And then when we meditate and we explore the inner world, we see, well, these things all change. Maybe today I have a lot of influence, tomorrow nobody listens to me. So it doesn't mean that I used to be good and now I'm bad. It just simply means that that's not who I really am. So when we meditate, we start to pull out the good qualities, the eternal qualities, the qualities that never go out of style and that work in any situation, and recognize this is my worth as a divine being, not what people think of me today, because public opinion keeps changing anyway. So the intellect has to kind of step in and recognize what the ego is doing and say, ego, stop putting these negative thoughts in my mind. They're not good for me. They drain my energy. They encourage me to see the world in distorted ways. They make me feel bad about myself. They make me feel bad about everybody else. So ego, stop doing this. But for the ego to stop doing it, we have to have pure, positive, high quality thoughts. And this is why we get together and meditate every day, because the more we can put high quality thoughts into the mind, the less space there is for the ego to control the mind. And then, even when we're not meditating, if we notice negativity, criticism, or a complaint, or something that I don't like, we can know, actually, we can know that's the ego. That's the ego trying to deal with a world full of problems, but that's not me. And then we switch to our higher consciousness and we intentionally put positive thoughts into the mind, because positive thoughts make us feel light. The negative thoughts of the ego drain our energy and make us feel heavy. So, in our time together today, we will focus on these beautiful positive thoughts that um, that uh, de-energize the ego, that take the power away from the ego. To begin with, take a few deep, full, easy breaths. Watch the air enter and leave the lungs. A simple exercise, breathing and watching the breath. Simple but very important, because it helps us relax and it helps the mind to become quiet. The ego makes a lot of noise in the mind. But when our higher consciousness is running the mind, the higher consciousness is very light. The thoughts from the higher consciousness are very light. Exhale, let the body relax. Exhale, let the mind relax. And let the mind feel light. I am the peaceful soul who lives in this body. I am a being of light, very refined spiritual light. Let the light of the soul radiate. Feel yourself surrounded by light, your own light. Light is the power of the soul. The light of peace, the light of stability, the light of gentleness. I, the soul, am a being of qualities. The body is a being of doing. The body does, and then we tend to judge ourselves on the basis of what the body does. Our self-worth comes from what the body does. But actually, if we can focus on the inner being of light, we'll get tremendous self-worth. And that self-worth will motivate us to do good actions with the body, to see the body as my sacred instrument. But for now, I'm going to be introverted and keep my attention on this little being of light. I, the soul, am eternal. I've always been. Unlike this body, the body has a beginning and an end, but the soul occupies the dimension of eternity. And because I am eternal, I have certain energies or qualities that are always with me. They never come and go, they're always there. Peace, joy, purity, wisdom, and love. The wisdom of the soul is innate. We always know who we are, where we came from. But when the ego takes over, we forget this. We forget that we're spiritual beings. So we don't want to fight with the ego for dominance, but rather we put the truth out there. And then the ego subsides. Its power becomes less. The truth of who I am. I'm a spiritual being, and I'm in this body, and I have the opportunity to express all forms of goodness through this body. And many of the actions that we perform are very routine and mundane and simple. But if I perform a simple action with great thoughts, that action becomes great. And so, just as all of us are divine spiritual beings, so is everyone else. If I can meet another person, and while I'm seeing that person in front of me, I'm also understanding that there is a divine being of light inside. And my interaction, soul to soul, might seem very ordinary. The words might be very ordinary, but the energy is very refined. And in my thinking, also, if I can start thinking from that place of higher consciousness, take a moment to activate the energy of joy or activate the energy of peace. Start thinking that way. And as I'm thinking, see myself as a being of light, light energy. Thought is like light. And keep myself on track. Then, if the ego pops in with a criticism or a complaint or a fear or a worry, if the ego pops in, anything like that, I can easily get myself back on track. No, that's outside. That's the ego. The ego doesn't understand. So let me stay on track. Let me keep my happiness. Just because the ego put up something negative, I'm not going to lose my happiness. I'm not going to lose my enthusiasm. And I don't accept the ego's reality because the ego is stuck in the past and the ego is stuck in its own story about the past. And the ego can only repeat the past. The ego can't be creative and make something new and different and exciting. So I very gently but firmly push the ego aside. No, no ego in my thinking. Thinking is the greatest thing a soul can do. So let my thinking be pure and positive and productive. For this, no ego. And then slowly, slowly, slowly over time, the reality of the ego gets weaker. And the reality of the soul, the higher consciousness, becomes stronger. And we start to feel ourselves to be powerful, spiritually powerful. And one of the powers of the soul is the soul can project itself into another dimension, the dimension of light, the home. See yourself in that dimension of light. We've been there countless times, we eternal souls. See yourself in complete silence, completely still, very light. and feel the presence of the Supreme Soul, who also is extremely light, the most delicate energy, very sweet light, light filled with love and peace and bliss. Love that doesn't ask anything of me, but acknowledges my divinity, my worthiness. And a love that inspires me and supports me. Be in that space of light with that supreme being of light. There is no ego there. When we are in the light of self-awareness, there is no ego. It doesn't exist for those moments. Peace, light, freedom. Then bring your awareness back into the body that you inhabit with the knowledge, the wisdom that you are separate from the body. You, the soul, are the higher consciousness. The body is not you. At some point, you'll leave this body. At some point, you'll get another body. You, the soul, are the powerful one. And when we hold this awareness that I am this sparkling star inside, then the ego disappears and negative thoughts cannot enter. Only lightness, creativity, inspired action. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti, sister.
Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.
Now we have a blessing. So this blessing is always a blessing about the inner being, the soul. The blessing today says, you are a pure-hearted soul who lets the true you, that wonderful being of peace, love, and light, shine in all you do. You are a pure-hearted soul who lets the true you, that wonderful being of peace, love, and light, shine in all you do. So have a sparkling day.
Thank you, sister.
Om Shanti.
Light inside.
Om Shanti. Thank you, sister. So
Sister-
nice to see you.
Sister, last week, Tuesday, you didn't have the class. I think nobody was there.
That was the day. Yeah, Yusuf, I was in Peace Village and Yusuf tried to get on to Zoom and he couldn't get on Zoom. That was why there wasn't class.
Oh, okay. Thank you, sister.
Okay.
Om Shanti.